you so much for your patience. And as it is in life, we get to work on the fly, especially with this new era of how we present things. So again, thank you for your patience. I think what you'll find today, this is in step and in line with what we've been covering here on Winning on Wednesdays in our series of trying to provide content that is useful and helpful to those that own and run businesses. So stepping right into it, I am Nathan Brinkman. I think some of what we have to do in life is share a little bit about who we are and what we are. The advantage I think I have is I've grown up in family businesses, and I have been subject to both good and bad buy-sells. So some of the things I'll cover today, I'll share with you a little bit about my story. I have 3 kids. We're on the end of our rope with kids. We have 1 left at home. We've recently, in the last week here, taken 2 kids to college. So I'm completely exhausted and my wallet is empty after the last couple of weeks. So I'm sure many of you are sharing that as you're launching your children or seeing your grandchildren go to school here this week. So I think some of this will be timely information for you as you think forward and what you're gonna do with your life and your business. But basically, all I spend my time doing is working with folks that own and run companies in this intersection of transition and succession. So we'll jump into it. First of all, what is a buy-sell, and why would we even be talking about this? Well, buy-sells are critical documents for people that own companies for a number of different reasons. One is it helps set the stage for what will come, and obviously, whether it's by intention or default, someday you are going to exit your business. So having a system behind that, having documents, legally binding documents behind that, will assure that a transfer occurs appropriately and it goes to whom you want it to. And B, and probably the most important side effect or impact of this is going to be your estate or your family actually gets paid. And at the end of the deal, that's what you want to have happen is protect your financial security as well as those that you love. So the first step in a buy-sell agreement, it is a legally binding contract. We'll talk about that in a minute, an agreement. And it involves having a number of different things. We're going to talk about the 5 basic ones today, which we call the 5 Ds, which is death. So that's a guarantee it's going to happen. We don't know when, but it's certainly something that a appropriately written buy-sell is going to address. The fact that when you or one of your other owners is no longer a part of the business because they're no longer here, there's language that helps with that. 2 is a disability, so that's not a guarantee, but it is something certainly that needs to be addressed. 3 is in the event of a divorce. I've been told that that's still around 50% in today's world. And then there's what happens in the event that there's a departure, again, whether it's voluntary, involuntary. And then we have the disqualification, which that would be more of a involuntary option. So why would we put that in there? Well, many of the businesses we work with require things like licensing, or the ownership group has to have an appropriate licensing. So think about, for instance, a surgeon group. You likely would not want to have a group of surgeons be owned by a different company. You want to have them have control over that. Interestingly enough, dental practices in Wisconsin do not require having somebody that is a licensed dentist be the ownership group. But things like in my business, accounting, attorneys, so on and so forth, generally disqualification. If I was an attorney and I got disbarred, I can't do my job anymore. That's an event that you want to have addressed. So think about that in your industry. Or you may have, we've seen this a lot where somebody does something that gets them in legal hot water. So they may be imprisoned or they may be involved in a big legal battle. That could be something you certainly want to have addressed in a buy-sell that you may not have thought about before. So again, there are a couple key and critical elements to a good buy-sell, and we'll be walking through those today from more of a 10,000 foot point of view. So again, we're not going to go into big details here. This is just more of awareness and what we see happening in real life. And again, I'd like to share a lot of some of those stories with you as we walk through this. The first thing you have to figure out is once you have a buy-sell, an appropriately written one, how are you going to fund it? So it's one thing to have an agreement, which is great, but then if there is a triggering event, you got to know how this is going to happen. So some business owners utilize cash. They keep high balances in cash positions within the business, and they do that intentionally so that in the event there was a triggering event, they've got the offsetting cash to do that. That's great if your business can afford to do that, but many businesses require working capital, and therefore they're unable to, or maybe in some cases unwilling to keep large pools of cash in their business. I would just say this, in that we very rarely see cash used. Some of the other downside effects to this was if in the event you ended up in a legal battle, that cash can be used against you as well. And then also too is many of our businesses just feel like with the interest rate they're receiving and that kind of stuff, it doesn't behoove them to keep significant amounts of cash in the business at this particular point. Two is you can utilize the borrowing of funds. Again, this is a great method for those that have credit worthiness, but imagine you have a larger business, maybe with 3 or 4 owners. One of them unfortunately went through a divorce or has credit issues and that kind of stuff. Unfortunately, one of the partners passes away or leaves the business. So you go now to a banking facility or a credit facility to borrow funds. Could be very expensive, or one of the partners may not be credit worthy enough to borrow that substantial amount of funds. So again, it's something we do see baked in and utilized. However, as a funding strategy, again, this would generally require good lines of credit, open lines of credit that are individually backed up by the ownership group. And you want to make sure each individual has the credit availability to utilize an open credit facility or line of credit. Again, a lot of it, I would say these are default options, meaning, hey, when we get around to it, we'll just park the cash over here, or we'll certainly be able to borrow money. Again, I'm not sure I would count on that long term. Again, there are other banking commercial credit folks that would be more be better suited to answer some of these. But on the backside, again, if you have a key individual, key owner that departs from the business for whatever reason, and the business ultimately the banking or credit facility says, boy, we don't know what the value of this business is, and you're utilizing that to borrow funds, again, is a major critical issue that we see often in the down the path of life and buy-sell agreements. A common one we see very often is the use of installment sales. So think about this: if I'm retiring from a business, inside my buy-sell probably is an option for the other partners to buy me out over a period of time. Again, these are very normal. We see these often embedded into buy-sell agreements. What it's trying to do is alleviate that cash pressure on the business and allow it to expand over a series of number of years. There are advantages to the seller, meaning you spread out that taxable gain over that period of time. But there are also disadvantages. As an example, if the business wanes or fails, and they no longer have the operating cash to buy it out, that puts both the business and the estate in a very bad position. So again, just something to think through. Often we see in combination with these last two, which is installment sale and insurance. Very, very often we see the use of life insurance, disability insurance contracts to be tied back to the buy-sell. Again, if there's a triggering event specifically to death, which again is going to happen eventually, disability may or may not happen, but those are the two critical ones that kind of have a timing issue to them, if you will. You don't see it coming, it just occurs. So again, we see often a combination of the use of insurance and in many cases installment sales. Some sellers are and business owners are much more comfortable just making sure it's completely funded via the use of insurance products. Again, that's more of a personal preference deal. So if you have somebody that unfortunately is not insurable, or the cost of life insurance is way up there, again, we see a combination of these two most commonly. Least common would be cash or borrowing. However, it's appropriate for us to cover all facets during something like this. So what are the different types of buy-sells? This is where we'll go into the weeds a bit. I would say many times it reflects how you have your company set up. So as an example, if you have something like a C corp, we would use one type of buy-sell agreement. If we're more of like an LLC or an S corp structure with a couple owners, you use a different type, and then it goes to what happens if you have a large ownership group. So think of something like multiple family members involved in a business or multiple owners involved into a business. That will all dictate essentially how we do it. So there are two types. One is what we call an entity agreement, entity plan, which is essentially stock redemption. So think of it like this: if I own a business, and I might have a couple different partners in the business, the company, the entity itself, will choose to purchase insurance or choose to create an agreement on, let's say we have 5 or 6 owners. In the event that happens, let's say I pass away, the insurance kicks in. The beneficiary of the insurance policy is likely the business or the corporation. Corporation would then buy out my shares, and then the other 4 owners in this example would get 25% of my share value or share number of shares. So again, there are pros and cons to all of this. There's some technicalities that have recently reared their head, of course. The IRS doesn't make things simpler on us. So as early as 2019, there were changes in what we call the transfer for value rules, and it specifically relates to these stock redemption plans, we call them. The second option is what we call a cross purchase plan. These are very common with groups of, let's say, 2 to 3 owners. So again, if there's 3 owners, in my example, I'm one of the owners and I pass away, likely what will happen, the other 2 owners just buy my estate or my shares out or the value out. Commonly, if you're funding this with installment or insurance sales, obviously, if there's 3 partners, 2 of the partners will go get insurance on the other partner, so you have a number of policies in play. So again, in some cases, these do get a little wily at times. So just for those of you that maybe have multiple partners, one of the solutions to this is what we call a trust-deed cross-purchase plan. So in other words, instead of getting, if you have 5 partners that are going to get 4 different contracts, what we'll do is we'll create an entity similar to the stock redemption, only it's a separate entity that's really designed to fund and buy out the buy-sell side in the event that there is a triggering event. So those are, again, called trust-deed cross-purchase plans. Personally, in my experience, we use those very, very often in, again, multiple ownership situations. Some of you may be a sole owner. So there's one owner in a business, and we call these one-way buy-sells. In other words, if I'm the sole owner of my business and I might have an employee that I want to have ownership if something happens to me, or maybe a family member, you write what are called one-way buy-sells. So again, I'm electing to at my triggering event, whether it's retirement, death, disability, whatever, it's going to this chosen person. Could be a group of people as well, but generally we see them as they're generally non-owners. So I'm retaining control of my business. I'm retaining ownership, 100% ownership of my business. But if something happens to me, I just want to make sure it goes to a certain set of hands. So those are what we call one-way buy-sells. Again, those often are funded as well. And those are very commonly funded with insurance because, again, if I'm a sole owner, I want to make sure that my estate, my family gets real value out of this. So in the event of something happening to me, I want to make sure that value transfers over to my kids, my wife, my family, so on and so forth. So again, those are things we see very often in one-way buy-sells, as the election generally of an employee or family member, but we also see them often funded with insurance. So we've kind of talked a little bit about why you would have why you would have a buy-sell agreement. So we covered the 5 Ds, again, death, disability, divorce, departure, or you have disqualification. We've talked a little bit about the structure of buy-sell. So if you remember, there's an entity, corporation would take out the owner. We've talked about cross purchase, and we've also talked about one way. Now let's talk a little bit about what are some of the red flags that we see in buy sells and what happens inside of buy sells and what you should avoid or what you should more importantly make sure is included. So a common one we see is the wrong entity is chosen. So a very common example we've seen is buy sells were originally set up as an LLC, and the LLC is now transferred to an S corp, and the buy sell is not keeping up with that. There are two pitfalls that fall in alignment. One is, believe it or not, they're taxed similarly but not the same. And two is, it is important that you have your own personal estate plan that reflects the ownership of S corp, ownership of a business. Very, very often we see when we do a global financial planning for folks inside the business as well as them personally, we see their personal estate plan not be reflective of the present ownership type. So that's just a big one, that if you have not updated your estate plan, if you've transferred recently or since you've done your estate plan from LLC to S corp, you want to have very specific language in your S corp as well as your buy sell, in your estate plan, excuse me, and in your buy sell that is reflective of this new S corp status. C corps are not as common. They are gaining more popularity, and if there's major tax changes here, you may see more of them. But again, a lot of you'd be surprised how often we just see the ownership type does not match up with the buy sell. So again, you want to make sure there is a lot of continuity there. It is important. That's why Susan and Dan and I get together, is because we believe in leveraging a team approach, making sure you have several experts that are involved in this, just so you don't get caught with a mistake like that. Two is establishing incorrect number of owners. So again, oftentimes we see where, as an example, we worked with a service group where the father retired, the son took over that position, and they had the same last name, same everything, and so we just, for whatever reason, it got missed until we went through a thorough process, and we're like, oh goodness, we probably should be using the right name here. Or you have somebody that retires, and the present ownership group decides, you know what, we're good with the number of owners that we have right now. So again, if you have a buy sell that doesn't reflect or update those changes as those triggering events occur, it does provide a lot of ill will in the event that something happens to the other person, because you unintentionally may bring in another person's estate into the mix that you really weren't intending to. And then two, going back to, if you remember that cross purchase agreement we were talking about, in this example, we're talking about the fact that we have 5 owners. So if we were to buy, if you're going to go fund it now with insurance to some degree, you're going to end up with 20 policies. Well, that may seem okay to you, but your accounting team, your CFO, controller may not love that, given the fact that they're having to track 20 separate contracts, fund, pay the premiums, do all that kind of stuff. So again, that's where it's important, I think, to make sure that you involve experts that know what they're doing in this. You certainly can simplify this in terms of its management, but you don't simplify it where you don't have an applicable buy sell. Transfer for value rules. So this is where we get into a little bit of complexities, and I would just tell you, recently, as early as 2019, this changed. So as we see a change of ownership, the type of ownership, again, my example of LLC to S corp, these transfer for values have been updated very recently. So if you're not familiar with how yours is written, or if you've made changes, you may have unintentionally triggered a transfer for value rule. So that's not a good thing, by the way. So we, again, this is more of a heads up of things have changed recently. If you have not updated your buy sell, or if you've changed things, you want to make sure that it's done appropriately and correctly, given the recent modifications to tax laws, and specifically the transfer for value rule. It doesn't allow for all 5 of the D. So again, a good example is this. We worked with a group. Unfortunately, one of them did some things that they weren't supposed to do, ended up in a whole lot of legal trouble. However, they still wanted to get the distributions, the dividends out of the business. So they're saying, well, hey, just because I did something wrong doesn't mean that I don't own a successful business, and if the rest of you are getting distributions, and I want them. And there was nothing in the agreement that allowed the other ownership group to separate it, even though it was a very public event. So that's just something, again, to keep in mind. You want to capture all five. And then the most common one, again, in this is you have a triggering event like a divorce. I haven't met a group yet that was like, hey, I'd love to be a business owner with your spouse. So again, you want to make sure you have very clear, appropriate language behind these five triggering events, and you capture all of them. Because if you don't, it'll be the one that you miss that'll get you, it seems. And then the agreement isn't funded, or better yet, it's not signed. So I can't tell you how many times we've done a review. They spent all the money with the attorney. They had this great agreement, and they just never sat down on a Monday morning or Friday afternoon to sign it. And so here they've invested the time, they've invested the money, but they actually do not have a legitimate agreement. There's a case here that we reference, but again, I've seen this many times where they kind of check the box mentally, where they, we went through the efforts, we got it done, and they did, they just never signed it. Or two, they have an agreement, it's signed, and it's not funded. And so we go into a trigger event, it's like, oh goodness, like what are we going to do now? How do we afford to do this? So again, if I'm the guy that has to buy out my partners for whatever reason, and there's not a funding mechanism, you're kind of stuck. You got to figure out how to do that. And so eventually this is where you end up in the courts, arguing about value, arguing about, what's to happen. And there's not a spouse out there, a widow, if you will, that is not going to want to get their due share, whatever they classify as their due share. Inconsistent definition of what is disabled. Again, this does come up. We have an owner, unfortunate softball accident. They can't come to work for a year. You got to be careful, because again, if you do that for an owner, you got to do it for your entire employee base. So having clear definition of what is disabled or what a disability is really, really important. Again, if it's loosey-goosey language, it can put you may want to benefit or help a partner, owner, but it may put you in hot water when it comes to other employee benefits, because what you do for one, you have to do for all, as you know, with our friend Arissa. And then I would say lastly, it's no proper valuation. Boy, this is one that it happens all the time. You go through this process of getting an agreement, at the time you come up with a value, but if you don't often go through and update those values, or you have a method for valuation that's very clear in there, this is the one that gets almost every buy-sell agreement. So I cannot emphasize enough. This is worth having a team go through this with you, consult with you to determine, should you just have a formula in there, or is it worth every year to go through and update value? But this is the one that most commonly you'll see arguments over. So I'm a big proponent for, not unlike your 401k or other investment accounts. If you own a business, you probably should understand its underlying value. You probably should have a third party that tells you this is what it's worth on a very regular basis. If you do that, you want to make sure you come back to your buy-sell agreement and make sure that those values are reflected. So again, it's not uncommon for us to have companies that do it really, really well for a couple of years. Year 5, 6, they get a little, you forget, or you get lazy or whatever, and you forget to update, and all of a sudden, boom, here's that triggering event with a bad value. So again, I cannot emphasize enough how important it is to make sure you understand the value of your business, which we've talked about under several subjects here on Winning on Wednesdays, but as it relates to a buy-sell, it is absolutely critical. So again, reach out to our team here. Dan, Susan, and myself are honored to host these with and for you. I hope you've been able to take away a few things as it relates to what buy-sell agreements are, what the triggering events are, the 5 Ds we talked about, what is in a good buy-sell, most importantly, what those 7 red flags were, with the underpinning again of make sure value is so important. At the end of the day, that's what you're trying to protect is the value inside your business. So not only will it help you, impact you, your partners, likely your estate and your family. So that's why this is so important. Again, we appreciate you taking the time to spend with us. Want to be respectful of your time. So we're a little bit beyond the 12:30 time hour, but invite you to join us in 3 weeks again. We'll be keeping this up, and if there are events or topics you find an interest in, please do contact us. Let us know, as we'd like to make sure that you're getting out of this as much as we can. So again, thank you on behalf of Dan, Susan, Kristen, and myself for joining us. Look for this on the Wagner website. These are recorded events. If you need more information, feel free to contact the three of us. We're happy to help. And again, thank you so much, and have a safe, pleasant, and great Labor Day weekend. It looks like in Madison, we're teeing up for a great weather weekend. So be safe out there. Thank you.